Good morning, eighth graders. So we are now kind of shifting the idea of catastrophic events into more of that meteorological severe weather sort of catastrophic. So we're going to start with blizzards or winter's fury. These are things that we experience yearly, multiple times in a year sometimes. Or in this case, I think we had technically one blizzard in the winter of 2023-24. So let's talk about it. But we are going to talk about some of the things like the characteristics of a blizzard. There are different types of blizzards out there. We're going to talk about the formation of the blizzard, how it kind of goes from just a snowstorm to something bigger. Talk about the impacts it can have on communities that are maybe not as prepared as West Fargo, North Dakota, but then also some of the safety precautions that we need to put in place in order to be successful. So let's see what we can get ourselves into. We are still working with Middle School Earth Science Standard 2-2 and 3-2, which states basically that you should be able to interpret meteorological data or weather data to predict potential meteorological disasters, but then also start the mitigation process. So 2-2 states that you will construct an explanation based on evidence for how geoscience processes such as earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, landslide, and weather have changed Earth's surface at varying times and spatial scales, as well as 3-2, which states that you will be able to explain what causes catastrophic events such as earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, landslides, and weather to form, but also then use that data to predict and mitigate future events. We have done a really great job with mitigating future events in this area, but not everywhere as prepared as we are. So make sure you have your winter storm notes in front of you, and we will get going. So imagine yourself caught in a blinding snowstorm. The wind is howling, the temperature plummeting. That is the essence of a blizzard. So these storms are not just heavy snowfalls, they combine wind and visibility reduction and duration to create these dangerous situations. So as we experience yearly, there are three key ingredients to creating a blizzard. Okay, so first of all is strong sustained winds. We're looking for like over 35 miles per hour. That doesn't take much out here in the plains. Okay, low visibility. So you're looking for less than a quarter of a mile for at least a 3-hour stretch. Okay, so most of the time when we have blizzards going on, if you live in town, you may not even know because we have so many different surroundings, so many different buildings and structures that are blocking the wind from going. But out here in Horace, most days I can't see a quarter of a mile just because of all of the wind that's kicking up snow and dust and things like that. But for a majority of areas, it's less than a quarter of a mile for about 3 hours. And then you need to have either falling or blowing snow. That is the difference between the types of blizzards, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But snow doesn't have to actively be falling to the ground in order to be considered a blizzard. So let's talk about the two different types of blizzards. We have ground blizzards and we have whiteout blizzards. Ground blizzards is what typically happens around here. This is where strong winds pick up what is already existing snow from the ground and reduces that visibility. Okay, versus whiteout blizzards is where you have fresh falling snow, which already lowers your visibility. But then often in like those open areas, there may not even be snow coverage because it's getting blown. Again, when I drive to work some days after snow, like it's night and day difference. So up in like by Cheney, we might actually have snow accumulation versus out here, because I have an open field just behind our house, all the snow just gets blown to where we maybe get a really big drift, but then the entire backyard is empty of snow. So those are kinds of the things that you take into consideration. Now, we get both all the time. But most of the time, just because of how cold we get, typically we get the ground blizzards because we would have already had snowfall on some of the warmer winter days, and then the winds will pick up. So that's kind of what's going on versus whiteout blizzards. Like, I can remember driving in whiteout blizzards, but not as often in this area. Now, what are some of the impacts of blizzards? Well, we already know this, and you guys are like, gee, this is what we live every day, every winter. But let's think about it in the fact that y'all are going to be like drivers soon. So let's talk about some of the things that is going to impact you driving. Okay, so impacts of blizzards. Obviously, we have reduced visibility. This is like the leading problem. So the leading hazardous travel conditions, accidents, and disorientation. I can remember driving home after like a blizzard has just started and be like, okay, where is my turn to just get into my neighborhood? Okay, so reduced visibility is one of the biggest impacts that we have. Extreme cold, okay? This poses health risks toward hypothermia, frostbite, all of that kind of stuff. So for people who aren't necessarily prepared, this is an issue. Power outages. We don't see this as often because we do live in an area where we live in the cold. So we have prepared ourselves for instances like this. But due to strong winds and heavy snow accumulations in some areas, the picture that is here right now could be legitimate, okay? Because they're not prepared. They don't have the infrastructure for this sort of weather. So we, I think, have lost power once in the middle of a snowstorm. And we lived in town, and I think someone hit a generator. So it wasn't natural causes necessarily that brought to this, but it's a possibility. Okay, and then finally, once you become homeowners and things like this or whatever, property damage is really big during blizzards. So your grown-ups may go out once in a while and clear off the snow from the roof, and that's because roofs, yes, are strong, but they're not strong for the amount of mass and weight that snow brings. So roof collapsing under the weight of snow is a really big issue. Down trees. So we don't have many trees in this area, but like my mom has lost a tree or two in winter storms. Thank goodness it's been in like our empty part of our yard, but those can be big deals. And then also just damage to infrastructure. This is where then you start getting those accidents that hit down streetlights, generators, stop signs, all that kind of stuff. That is more common property damage, not necessarily personal property, but property nonetheless. So those are some of the impacts for those who are not as prepared for winter storms. Now, blizzard safety. This is a big one, and until I started driving, I really didn't take it seriously. I'm gonna be real. So stay informed. Monitor weather forecasts and warning. We all have cell phones now to where it's like I get updates before it even looks like a blizzard outside saying, hey, prepare for a blizzard. So make sure you're watching that. As old school as it sounds, you can turn on the TV and watch the news. So that's always an option. Prepare an emergency kit. So yes, we have emergency kits kind of sort of prepared. You can probably go into a specific cupboard or your pantry or whatever, and you have non-perishable food. that you can eat. You probably have a bottle of water or two laying around. First aid kits, whatever that may look like for you. We have like legitimate first aid kits in our house, but I also have a 5-year-old. So that warm clothes, typically, I have like a t-shirt and shorts when I get home because it's comfortable. I'm laying around anyway, but in the winter, maybe I put on a pair of leggings instead of shorts, or I put a sweatshirt on over my t-shirt, things like that. But having warm clothes nearby, and then blankets. I don't know any house that doesn't have like that stack of blankets in the corner or on the couch, whatever. But those are good things to have in an emergency kit. Now, when it comes to your car, I have very similar things in my winter kit for my car. I have a first aid kit, smaller. I don't have as many non-perishable foods, but that's because Will typically comes with his own little like baggie of snacks whenever we leave the house. That water, we have our bottles of water and things like that. But I pack an extra coat in my car throughout the entire year, or not the entire winter. I have an extra blanket or two. Like Will always has his like car seat blankets, but like I get my big like twin size blankets and things like that. So those are always good to have in your vehicle in case of an emergency. Stay indoors. So if a blizzard warning is actually issued, just stay home. Don't do any unnecessary travel. Granted, if you're going to travel, make sure you're traveling with a hockey family because they know what's up. I've never felt unsafe with a hockey family in the winter. So that, but stay home. Don't do anything silly, especially when you have a vehicle. Don't like, oh, I'm going to go drive around town. Things like, don't do that, please. Dress warmly. Wear layers of clothes if you must go outside. Cover your head, hands, and feet. So this is really big. And especially for your age group, for whatever reason, like coats are not cool. Please wear coats if you have to go outside in a blizzard. If you're the person who has to clean off your driveway or make sure that your front step is clear or whatever, please put on a coat. Put on layers. Anytime I go outside to shovel, I even put on like snow pants. Do things like that. And then never walk or drive in a blizzard. Visibility is already reduced, and it's less, as I always say to like my mom or Mr. G or whatever, I'm not as concerned about myself walking or driving. I'm concerned about all the other goofballs that are on the road. And goodness forbid I am driving just to drive and I lose control and I like fishtail onto a sidewalk where someone is walking. That's not safe. Okay? So we all know this stuff, but let's also just like keep it a little bit on the forefront of our minds. Okay? So that is it as far as whole group goes. We're going to start talking about ice storms in this next section. But please remember your CHAMPS expectations if you're watching this in class or as you get going. Okay, so let me know if you need anything, but we're going to but we're going to continue with ice storms. So, ice storms. These are wild. We probably see a lot more ice storms than we give them credit for up here, but yeah, let's talk about it. So what is an ice storm? So first of all, an ice storm is when freezing rain falls and then forms a layer of ice on a surface. Now this surface can be, more than likely, roads, trees, and power lines. Okay? These are big deals, especially when driving on any surface. This is not what you want to be driving on. Okay, now what causes an ice storm to really happen? Well, it's specific atmospheric conditions, such as warm air above cold air, which leads to freezing. Now, we haven't really talked about the atmosphere and all of that yet, but this is kind of like your little introductory. So essentially what happens is you get this warm air mass coming in where there's already cold air. And what happens is this cold air essentially forces that warm air, because heat likes to rise. We've talked about convection. Okay, so it forces this warm air to rise above it. Now, warm air can hold more moisture. That's why in the winter you like get nosebleeds and you're all dried out and gross. But in the summer, like you step outside your like front door and it's like you just walked into a sauna where you get hit with moisture and heat. So warm air can hold much more moisture. And what happens is where that warm air cell meets that cold air cell, it essentially forces the water to condense out from water vapor into an actual precipitating like water. And typically it gets super cold or super freezed to where then when it falls, it's already partially iced. It's almost like that weird slushy state. And then when it hits our cold surface, it just freezes over. So that is what an ice storm is. Oh my goodness. Sorry. Apparently I'm tired. So, but that is what is happening to cause an ice storm. Yes, it can also it's not an ice storm, but you get ice obviously when you get melting one day of liquid or rain or whatever, and then the next day it's cold enough to freeze it. That's not an ice storm. That is just freezing. Versus this is where the actual rain falls or the slushy falls and then instantly freezes upon hitting a surface. Okay, so let's talk about this. Here is like the step-by-step of creating an ice storm. So first of all, your atmospheric conditions have to be perfect. This again is where you have the cold air front, all of this is cold, and the warm air front kind of coming together. So let me just read my notes so that I don't confuse myself. So ice storms typically occur when a layer of warm air is situated above a layer of cold air at the surface. This vertical temperature difference is crucial for the formation of freezing rain. So you have to have this cold air meeting this warm air. So the warm air moves in and advances over the colder air mass, creating a temperature inversion. This inversion traps the warm air above the cold air at the surface. So surface. Okay, you essentially have cold air. Okay, but now you're starting to get this warm air mass. Okay, and where they come and meet is this area. Okay, so you're with me so far. So we have our cold air that's already situated there. That's what's going on here. And now we have this warm air coming in and kind of going above. Okay, step 3, because that's where we're at with our day. Introduction of precipitation. Precipitation is just water falling from the sky. Okay, not necessarily rain. It can also be sleet, snow, ice, super freezed water, things like that. So it begins to rain in the warm air layer. Okay, then as it falls through the colder air near the surface, it encounters sub-freezing temperatures. So it might start as just rain up here. Oop, that's purple raindrop, but whatever. It might start as rain here, but as it falls down through the atmosphere, it may become more like ice. That's a snowflake, by the way. Don't judge my drawing. Okay, so it's super cool. The raindrop supercools as it comes in contact with the surface below the with surfaces below freezing. Okay, this causes the liquid rain to freeze on impact, forming a layer of ice on various surfaces. We've talked that these surfaces can be both trees, power lines, rooftops, roads, all that kind of fun jazz. Okay, and then step 5 is the actual buildup. So this freezing rain continues and it starts to accumulate on these areas, creating a thicker and thicker layer. Okay, to where if we look here, what's happening is you get this one layer, but then you get another layer because everything's super cooled, and then you get another layer, and before you know it, you got a good old little stack of ice. Okay. The thickness of the ice layer depends on the duration and intensity of the freezing rain. So however often this is coming down is going to depend on how thick this gets. Okay. And then finally the impact. This is where things get crazy. The accumulation of ice on surfaces poses severe hazards, including dangerous road conditions, damaged power infrastructure, and potential disruption to daily life. Where was I reading it? I read it somewhere, but basically like a quarter of an inch of rain, or of ice. So, right there. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, but that quarter of an inch weighs as much as like 300 pounds. I think that was the number. Don't quote me on that, but I need to look it up in the book that I know is at school, not here. But that much mass on trees, on power lines, things like that, like you're going to get damaged. That's heavy. That's not an elephant, but it's a big thing. Okay, so those are the things that create an ice storm versus just an ice nuisance. By the way, trademarked word, ice nuisance. Not my trademark, someone else's. But so that's what's going on to create this ice storm. So the thickness of ice accumulation puts a huge disruption on our transportation, on power, and on communication. So let's talk about transportation. So obviously roads. Okay, ice accumulates on roads, making them slippery and hazardous, leading to traffic accidents and road closures. The little arm thing that can come down to stop people from driving any further on I-94, out west, right after the Cheney exit, if you're getting on from interstate, that goes down because there is ice and it's not going to end well for anyone. And if you do drive around it, it is first of all a huge ticketed fine if you get caught, but then an even bigger fine if first responders have to come out and collect you. So air travel, ice can affect airport operations, including delays and cancellations. We know this. Power outages. So obviously the amount of weight sitting on power lines because of ice can lead to them sagging, breaking, leading to widespread power outages. Then you also have the risk of trees downing because of the amount of mass and then that hitting power lines. So we kind of talked about that. Telecommunications. So obviously not as big of a deal these days because with our cell phones, we use satellites to communicate more so, but back in the olden days when you had a landline, and probably not you, but when I did, ice accumulation on antennas and other things would disrupt phone services. But what we need to be more concerned with is the ice accumulation on the satellites, say from Valley News Live, KVLY or whatever, the ice accumulation on their satellites to actually send their broadcast up to space for that satellite to then send it back down toward you. Okay, that is what I mean by communication issues, is that can actually stop all sorts of communication. So never good. Environmental impacts. I don't really think about this when I'm thinking about ice storms. I'm thinking about myself. Um, excuse me. But let's talk about it. So the amount of environmental impacts that ice can honestly have on us and our ecosystem. So we've talked a lot about like trees and plants damage. So just the overall accumulation and the weight of ice on branches can lead to bending and breaking, causing damage to trees and shrubs. Now, what the problem is the long-term effect that has on this plant. So prolonged ice accumulation can result in stress, making trees more susceptible to diseases and pests. So after a really heavy ice winter, some of your trees and plants and shrubs might not actually come back because they were then introduced to a new disease or things like that in the spring, to where they didn't actually blossom or move forward with like the whole plant thing that they do. Don't ask me words right now. I'm tired. Okay. Wildlife disruption. So food accessibility is limited during ice storms versus like our voles and other rodents that have kind of figured out how to live in this sort of like climate. They know how to get what they need to, versus if we have ice covering that vegetation, it's going to limit what is actually available to them, making them more susceptible to seeking out human necessities. So that's where you get the rodents that somehow find their way into basements and whatnot, because they're literally just searching for food. And then shelter challenges. Ice storms can have a huge natural effect on habitats, making it challenging for wildlife to find sustainable shelter. So if a tree is iced over, what couple of little like finches and birds that do stick around then have the issue of is they could then, their branch could have been totally destroyed or whatnot. So shelter becomes more and more of an issue. Our aquatic ecosystem. Obviously with frozen bodies of water, you lessen the amount of ecosystem actually available, and depending on what sorts of fish were introduced during the summer months, some of them may be ready for that. Like our fish have figured out, like if I just go like deeper into the lakes, I'll be fine. There's enough food, enough like lower energy levels to where I can make it until ice out. Okay. But if a new species is introduced, they may not be as suitable for this sort of environment. But then with water quality and ice storms, the melting of accumulated ice may introduce pollutants into bodies of water. We'll talk about it as well in meteorology, but essentially all water wants to do is move to a bigger version of itself. When you think of it raining here, all of our sewers go into one area. The sewers then disperse, but then go into another area where more and more water just combines with itself. Natural runoff comes down a mountain, goes from a stream to a river to a lake to the ocean or something along those lines. Okay. So as this now ice melts and moves, it might be moving pollutants with it. Soil compaction. Now this is not necessarily a big deal unless you're a farmer in this area. But ice on top of soil, just that amount of mass. Snow is not as heavy as ice. to where it can compact the soil and affect the soil from being able to aerate itself. That's why you see some people going out in the spring and aerating their own lawns and whatnot, because our soil still needs actual gaseous oxygen to be able to do what it needs to do. And then with that soil compaction, we also have to talk about like plant roots. So our grasses do not go that deep into our soil to where they can be very much affected and not do what it needs to do come winter. That's why you're going to get those dead spots in your yard, or in random yards or whatever throughout the spring as the grass starts to come out of its hibernation state and start to photosynthesize and things like that. Now, there are things that you can do to help mitigate the environmental effect, okay? Pruning any damaged trees, going out there as soon as you can and getting those damaged branches and whatnot off. But then also before winter, pruning back some of those like questionable sorts of branches and getting them out of the way. There's always wildlife conservation efforts, so providing supplementary food sources to wildlife. Now, what I mean by that, not necessarily putting out a bowl of like Meow Mix and inviting every neighborhood stray to come to your house, but rather like we still have a bird feeder out in our backyard because there are finches that still stick around here throughout our winter. So making sure like on those super cold, like heavy ice blizzard days or the day after, making sure that there's enough food out there so that they can get what they need to. Things like that. We do put out some, I can't even think of the word right now. Some extra food for like deer and whatnot too. So, and then just monitoring your frozen bodies of water. Don't overfish if you go ice fishing, things like that, because they're already put under such stress. So, just that sort of stuff. Let's talk about the safety precautions for you though. In an ice storm, stay inside. Don't go outside. Okay, we've talked about that. Dress appropriately. Make sure you actually have like a coat on if you leave your house. Having an emergency kit. Oh my goodness, in your vehicle, around your house, whatever. Heating safety. This one's big. Don't be turning on like every sort of space heater possible. Only turn on safe or like non-broken space heaters in the space that you will be. And then make sure you're following all of their safety guidelines. Generators, please don't do anything with a generator. That is for your grown-up to handle, but make sure that you are, if you're using a generator, you're making sure it's outside and away from windows, just mainly to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. Yeah. Make sure that you are prepared for a power outage. We have flashlights all over our house in case there's a power outage. Having an alternate heat source, like if you have a wood burning stove, making sure you have wood that's ready for that or whatnot. Yeah. Driving, avoid it as much as possible. Don't be silly. Make sure you have an emergency kit in your vehicle if necessary. Tree awareness. Make sure that in ice storms you are staying away from trees. Like this would be the time where like Final Destination gets you and a branch falls down. So please be careful. And then also make sure you know how to stay informed, whether that is with your cell phone, whether it's watching TV. Make sure you're listening to every advisement that the professionals are giving you. Meteorologists do a lot of work, not the weather person, but the people who give the weather person all their data. They do a lot of work to make sure that you stay safe. Okay. Some emergency preparedness. So some of the things that maybe you want to take into consideration as you become older and as you become drivers and all that fun jazz. So maybe creating a winter emergency kit, creating a communication plan. This isn't something that I necessarily worry about right now, but as soon as like years past, if daycare calls and says we're closing early and the school district starts to close down early, knowing who you need to call to make sure that they are coming to pick you up or whom you are in charge of. So your 8th graders, if you have a 7th or 6th grade brother or sister, making sure that you have them in your possession so that your grown-ups only really have to worry about like one of you, sort of a thing. So that. Home safety measures, these are things that you don't think about. Making sure that you're going around or your grown-ups are going around and clearing any pipes and exhaust fans of snow and ice, because that can lead to carbon monoxide poisoning within your home, things like that. An evacuation plan, just in case. Say your home is compromised by carbon monoxide. What is the plan? Where do you guys go? Who do you call? Things like that. Generator safety, if you have a generator, please make sure that you know how to properly use it, or your grown-ups know how to properly use it. Heating alternatives. Power goes out. How are you going to stay warm? Okay. Windows and doors, ceiling. Some people put plastic over their windows. Some people put like rolled up towels in front of their doors in case they don't seal as well, things like that. So making sure that you have that figured out, emergency notifications, how are you going to get that information? And then also, what can your community do to help you, goodness forbid, you face an emergency during an ice storm? Okay. I want you to think about each of these. One of the questions in your notes is, what are 2 of these that you can actually implement within your own home? Or how is it already implemented within your home? So use that as like your thought process. And then just for winter storms and all, not just ice storms, but yeah, that's all I got. I feel like I've yapped at you enough today. Let me know if there's anything I can help with or support with, or if you have any questions. Make sure you get your notes done, and then I'm pretty sure there's a check-in. Awesome. If you have any questions, please, please, please let me know. Awesome. Thank you.